What would you write to the one person you love more than anyone else, yet fear more than anyone else in the world? It's a question that would haunt most of us for a lifetime. For Meghan Markle, it wasn't hypothetical, it was real, raw, and urgent. A father in pain, a daughter under constant scrutiny, and a letter that could either mend the fragile threads of family or expose every fissure that time, distance, and history had carved. This was not just a note on paper. It was a calculated risk, a delicate dance between hope and fear, affection and self-preservation. And as the world watched, no one knew what would happen next. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. The timing alone made this story explosive. Thomas Markle, Meghan's father, had recently undergone a major health crisis, including the amputation of a leg, a life-altering event that no parent or child could ignore. Most people, when faced with such news, would rush to offer comfort, reassurance, or support. But Meghan Markle's situation was anything but ordinary. The dynamics between her and her father were complex, tangled in a history that was public, private, and painfully scrutinized by a relentless media machine. The mere act of reaching out carried risk, scrutiny, and consequences that most of us could never imagine. Every line she wrote had the potential to be interpreted, distorted, or weaponized by journalists who seemed to lurk around every corner, waiting to turn intimate moments into global headlines. An insider close to the situation revealed that Meghan agonized over every single line she wrote. She walked on eggshells with her father, balancing love and fear, connection and caution. She knew the words had to be perfect, both warm enough to show genuine concern and careful enough to protect herself from further betrayal. Imagine composing a message to someone you want to embrace, while knowing that any misstep could ignite a media firestorm, damage your reputation, or reopen emotional wounds. This wasn't a simple letter. It was an emotional and strategic operation in prose form. The insider described it as warm, heartfelt. But it reads more like a press release than a private letter. And that phrase alone hints at the invisible weight Meghan carried. Every word measured, every sentiment calibrated, every pause intentional. But why does this matter now? Why should anyone care about the contents of one letter? The answer lies in the high stakes of the moment. Thomas Markle's health, Meghan's own vulnerability, and the constant public scrutiny create a perfect storm where private emotions collide with public narratives. The stakes are emotional, yes, but they are also cultural. Millions around the world have followed the Meghan Markle story with fascination, curiosity, and judgment. The letter, therefore, becomes more than a personal gesture. It is a lens into a fractured family navigating extreme pressure. It offers insight into Meghan's emotional world, her hopes, her fears, and the intricate strategy she employs to protect herself while maintaining connection with a father she loves, despite the risks. The tension surrounding the letter is compounded by the media landscape. Thomas Markle, the insider confirms, has the Mail on Sunday in close proximity, meaning anything he possesses could potentially reach the public immediately. Meghan was aware of this. Before she even sent the letter, she had to consider the implications. How much could she reveal without exposing herself to public scrutiny? How could she express warmth and love without creating another headline or being accused of manipulation? These questions hover over the narrative like storm clouds, creating suspense even before a single word of the letter is revealed. Perhaps most fascinating and heartbreaking is the duality of Meghan's emotions. She loves her father, that is undeniable, but she cannot fully trust him. It's a delicate balance, affection mixed with fear, hope tinged with anxiety. The insider captures this perfectly, saying, "She wanted connection, but the past has made her cautious. There's love there, but also fear. It's one of the most difficult things she's had to navigate emotionally." Imagine carrying a love so strong that it compels you to reach out, yet tempered by past betrayals and missteps that force constant vigilance. Every phrase in the letter was likely weighed for its emotional honesty and strategic prudence. Every sentiment had to serve dual purposes, convey warmth while shielding vulnerability. And yet, there is hope embedded in this story. Thomas Markle now has Meghan's contact information. The door, however slightly, has been reopened. The potential for reconnection exists, even if Meghan herself has no intention of visiting him physically. It is a gesture of cautious bridge building, a signal that while the past cannot be undone, the future might still hold a form of connection. But it is a tenuous hope, fragile and uncertain, contingent on Thomas's actions and Meghan's own emotional boundaries. Think about that for a moment. A father who has faced major health challenges. A daughter who has lived under global scrutiny for years. A letter that could serve as either a lifeline or a minefield. The stakes are intensely human, yet magnified to a public scale. This is not a simple family story. It is a study of trust, vulnerability, and the measures one must take to protect the heart while extending it. It's dramatic, yes, but it's also profoundly relatable. Haven't we all feared reaching out to someone we love, uncertain of how they will respond or how it might be received? Meghan's situation just happens to be played out on a global stage, making every word scrutinized, every pause analyzed, every emotion debated. The writing process itself reveals much about Meghan's state of mind. The insider emphasizes that she walked on eggshells. That imagery is potent. It evokes careful, deliberate movements, constant vigilance, and the ever-present fear of causing harm or being harmed. It's a powerful metaphor for the emotional minefield she had to navigate. Each word, each sentence, each paragraph had to be considered not only for its content, but for its potential consequences, both emotionally and publicly. It's a testament to the tension she felt. A desire for authentic connection constrained by the realities of her past, her father's history, and the unrelenting media scrutiny. Now, imagine sitting down to write a letter like that. Every thought carefully curated, every expression measured. You feel love and longing, but also trepidation and caution. You must protect yourself while expressing care. And all the while, you know the possibility exists that this private gesture may be intercepted, misrepresented, or leaked. It's a precarious act of emotional courage, and one that requires precision, mindfulness, and bravery. It's a performance of vulnerability, but not reckless vulnerability, crafted with awareness of the stakes, both personal and public. The emotional complexity of the letter also provides insight into Meghan herself. It suggests a person who feels deeply, who wants to maintain connections with family despite past difficulties, and who is willing to take measured risks to express that love. It suggests someone attuned to the realities of her world, balancing affection and strategy, heart and mind. It is a testament to resilience, to the courage required to reach out even when fear of betrayal is strong, even when the outcome is uncertain, and even when the world is watching. Every word she writes carries weight, every phrase is laden with meaning, and every pause holds significance. As we move forward into the story of this letter, keep in mind the unique pressures Meghan faced. Health crises, family estrangement, and media scrutiny all collide to create an emotionally charged moment. The letter is both a personal gesture and a public act, a deeply intimate communication constrained by circumstances far beyond the control of most people. The tension between private desire and public reality is what makes this narrative compelling. It's a story about love, fear, strategy, and hope, an emotional labyrinth navigated one word at a time. And yet, even with all the preparation, all the calculated phrasing, and all the emotional armor, there is a sense that the letter carries something genuine. Despite the strategic framing, despite the careful wording, the insider insists it is heartfelt. There is warmth beneath the caution, sincerity behind the carefully chosen sentences. That tension between vulnerability and protection, honesty and strategy, makes the letter both compelling and dramatic. It is, in many ways, a microcosm of Meghan's public life, emotional, scrutinized, and performed under pressure, yet undeniably authentic in its core. But what makes this letter truly fascinating is what comes next. It is not simply the content, or the phrasing, or even the emotional resonance that makes it remarkable. It is the implications. The door has been opened. Thomas Markle now has her contact information. A line of communication exists. And yet, Meghan has set boundaries, maintaining distance while offering a cautious bridge toward potential reconnection. What choices will be made next? Will Thomas reach out? How will Meghan respond? How will the world react? These are questions that hang in the air, unanswered, creating a suspense that is both personal and public, intimate and globally visible. The opening of this letter story leaves us on the edge. A father in crisis, a daughter balancing love and fear. A letter that could either heal or expose. A world watching, analyzing, and speculating. And at the center of it all is a woman navigating extraordinary pressure while attempting to maintain connection, empathy, and self-protection. The stage is set for revelations, emotional complexity, and dramatic tension, and the story has only just begun. What comes next will be revealing, shocking, and profoundly human. The opening act is complete. But the plot, the twists, and the emotional stakes are only about to unfold. The question now lingers. What exactly did Meghan write? How did she express love while safeguarding herself? How does one craft a message that balances affection with caution, emotion with strategy, vulnerability with defense? These questions set the stage for the chapters ahead, where every line, every sentiment, and every choice in Meghan's letter will be explored, analyzed, and dramatized. The tension is real, the stakes are high, and the emotional resonance is undeniable. And that is why this story matters now more than ever. Because it is not just a letter, it is a window into the human heart under extraordinary pressure. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the person who raised you, the one whose face you remember from childhood photos, whose voice you heard before the world ever intruded, suffers a life-altering crisis? For Meghan Markle, that question became painfully real when her father, Thomas Markle, faced a devastating health emergency, the amputation of his leg. It was not just a medical event, it was a seismic emotional shock, a moment that demanded attention, compassion, and, above all, connection. And yet, reaching out was anything but simple. For Meghan, the act of communicating with her father was fraught with risk, anxiety, and decades of complex history, magnified under the glare of global scrutiny. From the very start, the emotional stakes were enormous. The news of Thomas Markle's surgery hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through both private and public spheres. While most daughters might rush to the bedside of a parent in crisis, Meghan was navigating far more treacherous territory. She was not only a daughter but a global figure whose every move was scrutinized, analyzed, and often misrepresented. The notion of simply visiting a parent had to contend with paparazzi, reporters, and a media machine waiting to capture and distort every gesture. Even the most ordinary expression of concern could be twisted into a headline. The pressure to act cautiously was immense, and every decision carried layers of emotional and strategic significance. The insider revealed that Meghan felt a profound pull to connect, to reach out, to express her love and support. And yet, she also felt the weight of fear. Trust had been broken in the past, leaving scars that were not easily healed. She had to reconcile the desire to comfort her father with the caution required to protect herself and her privacy. Each thought, each word, each imagined interaction was filtered through the lens of past betrayals and media exposure. It was, in short, an emotional tightrope. One misstep could mean not just personal pain, but public humiliation. Imagine sitting down to write to someone you love dearly, knowing that the wrong word could be amplified, misquoted, or weaponized. That is the paradox Meghan faced: love that demanded expression versus fear that demanded silence. The insider emphasized how painstakingly she approached the task, agonizing over every line, measuring each sentiment for warmth, sincerity, and safety. The act of writing the letter was almost ceremonial, a deliberate and emotionally taxing exercise in balancing vulnerability with self-protection. And within this exercise, the emotional trigger, the health crisis itself, served as both catalyst and compass. It forced Meghan to confront long-simmering feelings and to navigate complex familial terrain with unprecedented precision. The act of writing a letter under such circumstances is both intimate and strategic. A parent's health emergency brings raw emotion to the surface, yet Meghan could not afford to release that emotion unfiltered. The insider describes her approach as walking on eggshells, careful, deliberate, and painfully aware of the potential consequences. Every word was scrutinized internally before it was allowed to be committed to paper. The emotional trigger of her father's health crisis forced Meghan to reconcile her instinct to express love with the necessity of protecting herself, an almost paradoxical requirement that most people will never fully comprehend. It was not enough to write from the heart. The heart had to be filtered through the lens of risk management. And yet, within this tension lay a profound human truth. The letter was a conduit for hope, a lifeline of potential connection amid uncertainty. It represented a bridge between two people whose relationship had been strained by history, circumstance, and the glare of public attention. The emotional trigger, Thomas Markle's surgery, was more than a news item. It was a deeply personal prompt that forced Meghan to confront feelings she had carefully compartmentalized for years. In that sense, the health crisis was not just a background event. It was the very catalyst that made the letter necessary, urgent, and emotionally charged. There was also a sense of urgency that made the situation uniquely complicated. Health crises, by their very nature, are unpredictable. Meghan's father's condition meant that there was a window, a fragile, uncertain opportunity, to reach out and communicate in a meaningful way. Delays or hesitation could result in missed opportunities for connection, and yet the risks of exposure, misinterpretation, and emotional vulnerability loomed large. Every decision had to be weighed not only for its immediate effect, but also for its long-term consequences. It is within this tension, the collision of urgency, caution, and emotional need, that the drama of the letter takes shape. The stakes were amplified by the presence of the media. Thomas Markle's proximity to the Mail on Sunday created a constant potential for public exposure. This meant that even private communications could quickly become headlines, eroding the privacy Meghan desperately needed to navigate her own emotions. Writing the letter under such conditions required not just emotional intelligence, but strategic foresight. Meghan was crafting words that had to serve dual purposes: to express care and concern genuinely, and to prevent unintended consequences in a highly publicized environment. The emotional trigger, in this sense, was inseparable from the strategic planning that accompanied it. Consider the internal dialogue Meghan may have experienced. On one hand, she felt the instinctive pull to reach out, to express support, and to connect with her father. On the other hand, she knew that exposure, betrayal, or misrepresentation could undo everything she had worked to protect. Each word she wrote carried the weight of these competing realities. The act of composing a letter became a negotiation between heart and mind, love and caution, vulnerability and self-preservation. It is a delicate balance that few will ever fully understand, yet it is at the heart of the story, the very reason the letter matters so profoundly. The insider's description captures the duality perfectly. Meghan was walking on eggshells with her father, balancing affection with fear, hope with caution. It was not simply a matter of emotional expression. It was a matter of survival, emotional survival under extraordinary circumstances. The emotional trigger of Thomas Markle's health crisis demanded attention and response, but it also required measured execution. The stakes were simultaneously personal and global, intimate and performative, immediate and long-term. It is within this complex interplay that the first chapter of the letter story truly begins to unfold. And yet, despite the careful preparation, despite the layers of caution, the emotional core remained. Meghan's desire for connection, her love for her father, and her hope for reconciliation were not diminished by strategic concerns. In fact, it was precisely because she cared so deeply that she approached the letter with such diligence. Every sentence, every phrase, every carefully chosen word was a testament to the depth of her feeling and the complexity of the relationship. The emotional trigger, the father's surgery, served not just as a prompt for action, but as a lens through which Meghan navigated the intricate balance of love, fear, and strategy. This is why the emotional trigger is so significant. It provides context, motivation, and a window into Meghan's inner life. It explains why the letter exists, why it is structured as it is, and why it carries such emotional weight. Without understanding the trigger, the urgency, the health crisis, the risk, and the history, it is impossible to fully appreciate the nuances of the correspondence. It is not merely a message. It is a response to a deeply charged situation, crafted with extraordinary care and imbued with emotional resonance that extends far beyond the words on the page. The chapter of the emotional trigger concludes with the realization that Meghan's actions were both courageous and calculated. She confronted the pain and vulnerability of her father's health crisis while simultaneously protecting herself against potential harm. The letter becomes a manifestation of this duality, an artifact of human complexity under extraordinary circumstances. It represents love, fear, strategy, and hope in a single gesture, a delicate balance that sets the stage for everything that follows. And yet, the story is only beginning. The letter is written, yes, but the contents, the phrasing, and the emotional dynamics are still unfolding. How Meghan navigates her connection with her father, how she balances love with caution, and how the world perceives these actions, all remain in suspense. The emotional trigger has been established, but the consequences, the revelations, and the human drama are only just beginning. And that is what makes this story so compelling. A single health crisis ignites a chain of emotional events with the potential to change everything, and no one knows what will come next. The emotional trigger has been set, but the first line of the letter has yet to be revealed. The stakes are high, the tension is palpable, and the reader or viewer is left on edge, wondering what words Meghan chose, what sentiments she conveyed, and what risks she calculated. The chapter ends here, with a single lingering thought. The trigger exists, the letter is in motion, and the consequences are about to unfold. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine knowing that the very act of reaching out to someone you love could backfire spectacularly. That's the position Meghan Markle found herself in as she contemplated sending a letter to her father, Thomas Markle. The stakes weren't abstract. They were immediate, intensely personal, and painfully public. Every word she wrote could be taken out of context, misinterpreted, or even weaponized by journalists hungry for a story. In this moment, Meghan faced a reality that few people could truly comprehend. Her love for her father collided with a very real risk of betrayal, exposure, and emotional pain. The insider sources are clear. Meghan was acutely aware of the potential hazards. She knew the letter might not remain private. Thomas Markle, surrounded by media attention and in close proximity to the Mail on Sunday, represented a channel through which private sentiments could instantly become public headlines. One misplaced phrase, one emotionally raw paragraph, and the world could be reading her most intimate thoughts. For anyone else, writing a letter is a simple act of communication. For Meghan, it was a high-stakes negotiation, a dance between vulnerability and caution, affection and self-preservation. Before she even began drafting, Meghan had to grapple with this risk. The emotional weight alone was staggering. Writing to her father under such conditions meant acknowledging the possibility of betrayal before she even sealed the envelope. She had to ask herself, how much can I reveal without compromising myself? How much trust can I risk? These questions are fundamental in any delicate relationship, but under the public gaze, they acquire exponential intensity. Every decision was layered. Every sentence, every expression, every pause had potential consequences far beyond the personal sphere. It was a precarious tightrope, where one misstep could mean both emotional pain and global scrutiny. The insider details that Meghan agonized over every word is telling. She didn't simply write from instinct or emotion. Each line was analyzed, weighed, and considered for both impact and safety. She approached the letter as a strategist might approach a delicate negotiation, aware that the balance of love and risk must be carefully maintained. The phrase "she knew there was a risk" doesn't merely describe caution. It encapsulates the psychological tension of writing under constant potential surveillance. She had to navigate the dual realities of expressing care while safeguarding herself against misuse or exposure. And the risk was not abstract, it was personal. Trust between Meghan and her father had been fractured in the past. Moments of miscommunication, misunderstanding, and public exposure had created a history of caution. Each line she wrote had to be tempered by experience. It was not enough to want connection. She had to calculate the probability of emotional harm. And yet, despite this, she felt compelled to reach out. It was an act of bravery, not just of emotion, but of psychological and strategic fortitude. She was willing to risk vulnerability because the circumstances, the crisis her father was facing, demanded it. The media dimension of risk added another layer of complexity. Every interaction between Meghan and her father had the potential to become a headline. Paparazzi, tabloids, and reporters would be ready to interpret and sensationalize. Meghan's letter, no matter how heartfelt or private, could be dissected line by millions. It is one thing to express emotion in private. It is another to do so knowing that the world could analyze, criticize, or misrepresent your words. This external pressure made the act of writing simultaneously necessary and terrifying, amplifying the emotional stakes exponentially. Consider the mental and emotional calculations she had to perform. Meghan could not afford impulsive phrasing or unguarded sentiments. Her letter had to convey love and concern without creating openings for exploitation or misinterpretation. She was effectively balancing two parallel narratives: the personal desire to connect with her father and the protective imperative to shield herself from potential fallout. Each sentence was a calculated risk, each paragraph a blend of sincerity and self-defense. In essence, she had to write with one eye on the heart and the other on the world. But the stakes were not only emotional and media-related, they were relational. Meghan had to navigate the precarious dynamics of her relationship with Thomas Markle. Past experiences had taught her caution. The insider describes her as walking on eggshells, deliberate, careful, measured. This is a striking metaphor, capturing both the tenderness and the tension of the situation. She wanted to be loving and genuine, yet she had to avoid triggering past grievances or misunderstandings. The risk was relational as much as it was emotional or public. What makes this even more compelling is the internal conflict Meghan faced. On one hand, she felt a moral and emotional imperative to respond to her father's health crisis. On the other, she knew that any misstep could have consequences not only for her relationship with him, but also for her own emotional well-being. She had to weigh immediate emotional needs against long-term protective measures. The tension between these imperatives created an emotional pressure cooker, a situation where every choice carried weight, and every word could either heal or hurt. The insider quotes reinforced this sense of caution. Meghan was acutely aware that the letter might not remain private. She understood the risk, yet she felt compelled to act anyway. This highlights an essential truth: love and risk are often intertwined. The depth of her concern compelled her to reach out despite potential dangers. It is a testament to both her emotional intelligence and her courage. She recognized the hazards but prioritized connection, showing a willingness to engage in controlled vulnerability. Now imagine the thought process. If one phrase could be twisted by the press, by her father's interpretations, or by history, then every word required scrutiny. Meghan was effectively drafting a message in a high-stakes arena with multiple audiences: her father, the media, and the global public. That level of cognitive and emotional labor is extraordinary, and it explains why the letter was described as being measured in every way. It was carefully constructed to navigate the minefield of personal history, emotional vulnerability, and public exposure. Yet, despite the caution, there remained warmth and sincerity in her writing. The insider emphasizes that the letter was heartfelt. It was not merely a strategic exercise, it carried genuine emotion. But the duality of the letter, warmth coupled with strategic caution, is what makes it fascinating. Meghan had to ensure that her love did not compromise her safety or emotional well-being. It was an intricate balance, a high-wire act in prose form, where sentiment and strategy were inseparable. The risk extended even beyond the letter itself. Thomas Markle now had her contact information, creating the potential for direct communication. But Meghan had set boundaries. She would not visit in person. The letter opened a line of communication, but under controlled, measured circumstances. This delicate arrangement underscores the risks inherent in reconnecting. Proximity can be dangerous, even when mediated through words on a page. The risk was emotional, relational, and public, and navigating it required extraordinary care. The psychological dimension of the risk is also critical. Meghan had to confront the possibility of disappointment, rejection, or misinterpretation. The fear of emotional harm is a powerful deterrent, yet she acted despite it. That willingness to engage with vulnerability, tempered by caution, demonstrates both emotional intelligence and resilience. She balanced fear and affection, caution and care, creating a letter that was both protective and connective. Ultimately, the risk Meghan took in writing the letter is a central theme of this story. It illuminates the tension between love and self-preservation, connection and protection, vulnerability and caution. The emotional trigger of her father's health crisis propelled her into action, but the potential consequences shaped the way she acted. Every word, every phrase, every paragraph reflected this careful negotiation. It is a story of courage under scrutiny, of emotional labor under pressure, and of love exercised responsibly in a high-stakes context. And yet, even with all the caution, even with all the strategic planning, the letter carried the potential to surprise, to move, and to reveal. It was a high-stakes gamble, balancing the risk of exposure against the imperative to connect. The world would never see the letter in private, but the act of writing it reveals the extraordinary tension and courage at its core. It is an intimate moment made dramatic by circumstance, a private expression intensified by public risk. But what came next would escalate the stakes even further. The letter was written, the words carefully chosen, but how would Thomas respond? How would the media react? How would the world interpret this gesture of cautious connection? The risks Meghan faced were not resolved with the stroke of a pen. They were just beginning to unfold, setting the stage for revelations, confrontations, and emotional turbulence that no one could predict. And that is where the story moves next. Into the complex terrain of communication, strategy, and emotional consequence. She knew that one misstep could undo everything. That was the reality Meghan Markle faced as she began drafting the letter to her father, Thomas Markle. This wasn't just a note from a daughter to a parent. It was a carefully orchestrated act, a negotiation in prose, a delicate balancing act between emotion and strategy. Every word had to serve a dual purpose: convey love, warmth, and sincerity, while simultaneously protecting her from potential misinterpretation, betrayal, or exposure. It was diplomacy in the form of handwriting, where the stakes were as personal as they were public. And the irony was unavoidable. A personal letter had become a battleground. From the very first line, Meghan had to think like a diplomat. She was aware that Thomas, despite being her father, was not entirely a safe recipient. Past breaches of trust, combined with constant media surveillance, meant that even intimate sentiments could be manipulated. Imagine writing to someone you love, but feeling as though your words could be dissected by millions before they even reach their intended target. Every phrase had to be carefully calibrated, every sentiment carefully framed. It was an emotional negotiation with herself as much as with her father. How much vulnerability could she allow without jeopardizing herself? How much warmth could she show without giving too much away? The insider revealed that Meghan walked on eggshells with him, and the metaphor could not be more fitting. Crafting the letter was akin to navigating a minefield. One wrong word could trigger an emotional backlash. One phrase could be misread. One overly candid admission could find its way into a headline or become fodder for public debate. The emotional labor required for this process is almost unimaginable. Most people, when writing to loved ones, write with spontaneity, letting emotions flow freely. Meghan could not do that. She had to think strategically, weighing every possible outcome before committing pen to paper. This is where the diplomat metaphor becomes especially vivid. In diplomacy, words are weapons, shields, and tools for negotiation. A single sentence can signal intent, convey reassurance, or establish boundaries. The same applied to Meghan's letter. Her goal was to express care and affection, yet she had to construct each line as a buffer, a protective layer against emotional risk. Her words needed to reassure her father, demonstrate love, and maintain a sense of connection, but also to guard her own emotional security. It was a balancing act that demanded acute awareness, emotional intelligence, and strategic foresight. The process was painstaking. The insider explained that Meghan agonized over every sentence, rewriting, editing, and reconsidering. She had to ensure that her tone conveyed warmth without vulnerability that could be exploited. Every word was measured. Every comma, every phrase, every paragraph carried weight. Imagine drafting a message knowing that the recipient could misinterpret your intent and that the public could scrutinize your words. That is the reality Meghan faced. The act of writing, in this sense, was both personal and performative, a private communication conducted under the invisible spotlight of global attention. And yet, within this careful construction lay genuine emotion. The letter was heartfelt, warm, and tender, but it was not unguarded. The insider notes that the letter reads more like a press release than a private letter, highlighting the tension between sincerity and strategic protection. This duality is key to understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. Meghan wanted to express connection and care, but she also had to maintain boundaries and protect herself from potential exposure or emotional harm. It was diplomacy of the heart, a careful negotiation between authenticity and caution. Consider the psychological landscape she navigated. On one level, she was reaching out to her father, motivated by love, concern, and the urgency of his health crisis. On another level, she was safeguarding herself against potential betrayal, misinterpretation, or media exploitation. These layers of risk created a tension that permeated every sentence. It is a paradox. The more she cared, the more cautious she had to be. The act of expressing love became inseparable from the act of self-protection, transforming what would normally be an intimate gesture into a strategic and emotionally charged operation. The careful crafting of the letter also highlights Meghan's emotional intelligence. She understood not only her own vulnerabilities, but also the potential triggers, expectations, and sensitivities of her father. Diplomacy is about anticipating reactions and adjusting language accordingly. Meghan's letter reflects this principle. Each sentence anticipated potential interpretations, each paragraph considered emotional responses, and each phrase was weighted for impact. It was a communication designed to maximize connection while minimizing risk, a rare skill in personal relationships, magnified exponentially by public attention. This approach created a delicate tension. On one hand, Meghan's words needed to be genuine and expressive. On the other, they had to be calculated and cautious. That duality is what makes the letter so compelling. It is simultaneously a bridge and a barrier, a conduit for emotional connection and a shield against potential harm. The reader or viewer can feel the tension in every line, the desire to reach out, tempered by the fear of what could go wrong. It is a testament to the emotional sophistication required to navigate such a situation under extreme circumstances. Humor, too, was a subtle tool in this process. While the letter was not casual, Meghan reportedly used light touches to soften the emotional weight. Humor can serve as a buffer, providing relief while maintaining connection. It can also humanize a message, making it feel less like a calculated document and more like a genuine outreach. Even in a letter that required careful construction, small elements of levity could convey warmth and emotional nuance, signaling care without compromising protection. The process of crafting the letter also involved anticipating the public eye. Even if the letter remained private, Meghan knew that the potential for exposure existed. This awareness influenced her word choice, tone, and framing. She could not write as if she were in a vacuum. Her private communication was informed by the possibility of becoming public, shaping the way she approached every paragraph. This interplay between private intention and public risk is a defining characteristic of the letter and a lens through which we can understand Meghan's strategic mindset. The emotional stakes of each word were compounded by the history between Meghan and her father. Trust had been fractured, and previous interactions had left scars. Crafting a letter under these conditions required navigating not only the immediate risk of misinterpretation, but also the accumulated weight of past misunderstandings and disappointments. Every line needed to acknowledge love and concern while maintaining boundaries and emotional safety. It is a profound act of self-awareness and emotional sophistication, one that few outside of such extraordinary circumstances could fully appreciate. Finally, the diplomat's approach underscores the courage required to reach out in such conditions. Writing the letter was an act of vulnerability wrapped in strategy. Meghan exposed her heart while simultaneously defending it, balancing risk and reward, affection and caution. It is an extraordinary example of how emotional intelligence and strategic thinking intersect, creating a communication that is both deeply personal and remarkably resilient. But even with all the care, all the planning, and all the strategic thinking, there remained an element of unpredictability. How would her father respond? How would the words be received? And what unforeseen consequences might arise from a gesture designed to bridge emotional distance while maintaining protection? The act of drafting the letter was just the beginning. The stakes had been set, the groundwork laid, and the emotional tension was building towards something far greater than the words themselves. The crafting of every line like a diplomat concludes with the realization that communication is never neutral when stakes are high. Words carry power, intention, and consequence, and in Meghan's case, every sentence was loaded with both emotional and strategic weight. She had constructed a letter that could convey care, protect her heart, and navigate decades of fractured trust, all under the potential gaze of a global audience. And yet, the real drama, the reaction, the interpretation, and the unfolding consequences was still ahead. But what came next would test every carefully chosen word, every calculated phrase, and every emotional intention, and no one was prepared for the impact that would follow. How do you express love while ensuring every word is safe, measured, and immune to misinterpretation? That is the paradox at the heart of Meghan Markle's letter to her father, Thomas Markle. According to insider accounts, the letter was warm, heartfelt, but reads more like a press release than a private letter. At first glance, that might sound contradictory. How can something be heartfelt and yet resemble a press release? And yet, that contradiction perfectly captures the tension that Meghan navigated. She wanted to connect, to convey genuine affection, yet she had to shield herself from emotional and public risk. Each word had to do double duty, express care, and safeguard vulnerability. The insider described her process as painstaking. Meghan agonized over the tone, pacing, and content of the letter. Every sentence had to communicate warmth while maintaining emotional boundaries. Imagine sitting down to write to someone you deeply love, someone who has hurt or disappointed you in the past, and knowing that your words could easily be misread, manipulated, or even weaponized. It's an emotional paradox. How do you convey sincere affection when the act of expressing it could cause harm? This duality, love wrapped in caution, is the defining feature of the letter. The press release comparison is particularly telling. Press releases are crafted to be precise, controlled, and intentional. They communicate a message clearly and strategically, often to multiple audiences at once. Meghan's letter had to function in a similar way. Though addressed to her father, it carried potential implications for herself and, by extension, the media. She was aware that Thomas could share the letter or that its contents could be exposed publicly. In that sense, the letter was simultaneously private and strategic. A delicate balance rarely required in personal correspondence. Every line had a dual function: convey emotion and protect her. For example, a simple statement of care or hope could be interpreted as emotional vulnerability or leverage if read incorrectly. Meghan had to navigate these linguistic minefields, ensuring that her sentiments were genuine yet insulated from possible misuse. The insider emphasized that she had to protect herself, highlighting the omnipresent tension between heartfelt expression and self-preservation. The letter became a vessel for love, yes, but a love carefully structured and fortified. Consider the psychological complexity of this task. On one hand, Meghan wanted to offer comfort and connection in response to her father's health crisis. On the other hand, she had to anticipate his reactions, her own emotional responses, and the potential for external interference. The result is a document that is deeply human yet unusually calculated, intimate yet strategically designed. The comparison to a press release is apt. Each word had been filtered, measured, and scrutinized before it could be committed to paper. Yet, despite the careful construction, the letter did not lack genuine emotional resonance. The insider confirmed that it was warm and heartfelt, revealing that Meghan's love and concern for her father were intact, despite the risks. The contrast between genuine sentiment and strategic formulation is what makes the letter compelling. It illustrates a complex reality. Expressing love can be perilous, especially when history, media attention, and mistrust are in play. Meghan's letter embodies the delicate balance between emotional honesty and protective calculation. This tension is further amplified by the public context surrounding the letter. Thomas Markle's proximity to the media, particularly the Mail on Sunday, meant that any correspondence could potentially be publicized. The threat of exposure loomed large, and every word had to be carefully considered. The letter, therefore, had to operate on multiple levels: personal, emotional, strategic, and even performative. It was not just a message to a father. It was a safeguard against the unpredictable dynamics of family, media, and public perception. Imagine reading a letter that is intended to be intimate but reads like a controlled document, crafted to navigate both affection and risk. That is the unique tension at play here. Meghan's language was deliberately chosen to maintain balance, demonstrating care while limiting vulnerability. The insider's description highlights this balancing act. The letter is emotionally charged, yet every word is calibrated. It is an act of careful diplomacy, with sentiment tempered by foresight. Humor and subtle emotional nuance were likely part of this careful construction. Even in a letter described as press release-like, small touches of warmth, levity, or personal reflection can humanize the message, signaling genuine care without compromising strategic boundaries. These touches soften the calculated tone, creating a letter that is both emotionally resonant and strategically robust. The emotional and intellectual labor involved in crafting such correspondence is immense, underscoring the difficulty of maintaining authenticity under scrutiny. The insider also emphasized the heartbreaking quality of the situation. Meghan's intentions were genuine. She wanted to reconnect, to bridge emotional distance, and to extend care. Yet the past had made her cautious. She loved her father, but she feared betrayal, misinterpretation, and exposure. That duality, the tension between hope and fear, is at the core of the letter's emotional resonance. It is warm, yes, but measured; heartfelt, yes, but cautious. It represents a daughter navigating a minefield of familial and public pressures, demonstrating emotional intelligence under extraordinary circumstances. The letter's tone and structure also reveal Meghan's awareness of history. Past conflicts, miscommunications, and moments of public exposure informed every word. She understood that emotional vulnerability, if unguarded, could lead to harm. Therefore, each sentence had to be constructed with foresight, expressing care without exposing weakness, offering connection without compromising safety. This is what makes the letter both compelling and instructive. A window into the psychology of someone negotiating the intersection of love, risk, and public visibility. And yet, for all its calculated precision, the letter was not devoid of risk. Giving her father access to her contact information, while maintaining physical distance, created a new dynamic fraught with potential consequences. It allowed for the possibility of reconnection, but also introduced uncertainty. Would he respond appropriately? Could old wounds be reopened? The letter, therefore, represents both hope and tension, a careful opening into a relationship long strained by history and circumstance. Meghan's dual strategy, warmth mixed with strategic framing, is emblematic of her approach to public and private life. She understands that emotional honesty carries weight, but also risk. Her letter mirrors her broader navigation of visibility and scrutiny, authentic yet guarded, expressive yet measured. The press release-like quality is not a flaw. It is a reflection of the careful attention required to maintain balance in emotionally high-stakes situations under public observation. At its core, the letter demonstrates the interplay between love and caution. Meghan's desire to connect with her father is genuine, but it exists alongside a profound need to protect herself. Every word, every paragraph, every phrase reflects this tension. The letter is simultaneously a bridge and a shield, a demonstration of care and an act of self-preservation. It is the embodiment of emotional complexity, an attempt to reconcile affection, fear, and strategy in a single, intimate gesture. The insider captures this perfectly. She wanted connection, but the past has made her cautious. There's love there, but also fear. It's one of the most difficult things she's had to navigate emotionally. That sentence sums up the entire dynamic of the letter. The simultaneous presence of affection and vigilance, hope and caution, connection and self-protection. It is this delicate balance that makes the letter remarkable, revealing, and compelling for anyone following the story. And yet, Despite the care, strategy, and warmth, the letter contains something more, a subtle tension, a sense of anticipation, a hint of uncertainty about what comes next. It is more than words on a page. It is a living document of emotional navigation, a record of careful risk-taking, and a testament to the challenges of reconciling love with caution. The press release-like quality does not diminish its emotional power. It enhances it by highlighting the extraordinary circumstances under which it was written. The chapter concludes with the recognition that Meghan's letter is both protective and connective, strategic and heartfelt. She has navigated the minefield of emotional and public risk with sophistication, crafting a message that bridges a gap while safeguarding her own vulnerability. But the story is far from over. The next chapter will delve into the deepest emotional currents of the letter, exploring how fear, history, and desire for connection converge to shape the words and the impact they carry. But what came next would reveal the most human and vulnerable side of the letter, and it caught everyone by surprise. What do you do when love is present, but trust is shattered? That is the dilemma Meghan Markle faced as she prepared to send a letter to her father, Thomas Markle. Most people assume that family bonds are automatic, unconditional love, unquestioned loyalty, but Meghan's story proves otherwise. Love alone cannot erase years of misunderstanding, betrayal, and public exposure. Every gesture, every word, every attempt to connect carried the weight of past transgressions. The emotional stakes were immense. She wanted closeness, yet she feared being hurt again. This is the reality of navigating family relationships under extreme circumstances, magnified for someone living under constant public scrutiny. Insiders have revealed that Meghan's fear of betrayal was not irrational. It was rooted in decades of experience. Trust had been fractured, not only by private missteps, but by a history that had repeatedly played out in the public eye. Thomas Markle's previous interactions with the media, the exposure of private moments, and misunderstandings over the years had left deep emotional scars. For Meghan, trust was not simply a given. It was something she had to cautiously assess, evaluate, and protect. Every word she wrote in her letter had to account for this fractured trust, balancing emotional connection with self-preservation. Imagine the psychological toll of reaching out to someone you love deeply, knowing that past behavior might repeat itself. Meghan faced this challenge head-on. She had to reconcile affection with caution, hope with fear, and desire for connection with the risk of emotional harm. Each line in her letter was filtered through this lens, a desire to heal, tempered by a fear of being hurt again. This tension gave the letter its emotional intensity and its complex duality. Warmth intertwined with vigilance. The insider emphasized that Meghan walked on eggshells in her communication, highlighting the delicate dance she had to perform. Walking on eggshells is not merely a metaphor. It conveys the precise combination of fear, anticipation, and care required to navigate a relationship where trust has been damaged. One wrong phrase could trigger an emotional setback or, worse, a public misinterpretation. Meghan's caution was not cold or distant. It was a strategic and emotional necessity born from the history she could not ignore. This fractured trust extended beyond her father. The public nature of their estrangement added an additional layer of complexity. Every action, every letter, every gesture existed not only in the private sphere, but also under the potential scrutiny of global media. Meghan could not simply trust privately. She had to account for the possibility that private words could be turned into headlines. This dual pressure, personal history and public visibility, heightened the stakes and made the act of sending the letter a remarkable act of emotional courage. Despite her fear, Meghan wanted to reach out. This is a critical aspect of her letter. Love and care were genuine, even when the risk of betrayal was high. The insider described the letter as warm and heartfelt, showing that even under the strain of mistrust, her affection remained intact. But that warmth was carefully controlled, measured, and calculated to minimize the possibility of harm. It is this balance between genuine love and cautious protection that gives the letter its extraordinary tension and emotional depth. The fear Meghan experienced was not abstract. It was grounded in real potential outcomes. Trust, once broken, can manifest in heightened vigilance and self-protective behavior. Meghan's letter was a reflection of this psychological reality. She was expressing care while simultaneously creating a buffer against possible missteps, misunderstandings, or betrayal. It was a careful negotiation between opening her heart and maintaining emotional safety, a feat that requires exceptional emotional intelligence and self-awareness. Her internal struggle highlights a universal tension, the desire for connection versus the instinct for self-preservation. While many of us experience this dynamic in everyday relationships, Meghan's situation is amplified by her life circumstances. Public scrutiny, media interference, and the high stakes of personal and familial relationships make this a particularly acute example of emotional navigation under pressure. The letter represents both the courage to act and the caution required to survive emotionally, making it a deeply human yet extraordinarily complex gesture. The emotional conflict is further heightened by the potential for miscommunication. Meghan knew that any expression of vulnerability could be misinterpreted, either by her father or by the media. This awareness required meticulous attention to tone, phrasing, and structure. It is one thing to write a letter in private. It is another to compose a message with the awareness that every word might be analyzed publicly. Meghan's fear, rooted in history, informed her every decision, shaping the content, structure, and emotional framing of the letter. Yet, for all the fear and caution, there was hope embedded in the letter. Meghan's intent was not merely defensive, it was connective. She wanted to bridge the emotional distance that had grown over years of misunderstandings and public exposure. The insider confirms that her love was genuine, even as she exercised caution. This delicate balance between hope and fear is central to understanding the letter. It is not just a message. It is a carefully constructed emotional bridge designed to reach across fractured trust while protecting her heart. The historical context adds depth to this fear. Thomas Markle's previous interactions with the media, his public comments, and his perceived betrayals had created a pattern that Meghan could not ignore. Each past event added weight to her caution, shaping the way she approached communication. Her letter was a response not only to the immediate health crisis, but also to the accumulated history of their relationship. It had to acknowledge the past, navigate the present, and anticipate potential future consequences, a task few could perform with such emotional sophistication. The emotional stakes were further compounded by Meghan's own vulnerabilities. Public scrutiny, criticism, and the challenges of her own personal life meant that the risk of emotional harm was intensified. The letter had to serve as a protective measure, guarding against not only her father's potential actions, but also the broader public narrative that could distort her intentions. Every word, every phrase, and every sentiment was filtered through this lens, creating a document that is both deeply personal and strategically designed. Despite the complexity and the fear, Meghan's choice to send the letter demonstrates remarkable courage. It is not easy to reach out to someone who has hurt you, who may not act as you hope, and who exists in a context where private words can become public spectacle. Yet, she acted. The act of writing the letter is a testament to her emotional resilience, intelligence, and capacity for hope. Even under the weight of fear, she reached across the divide to attempt connection. But fear alone does not capture the full complexity of the moment. The insider emphasizes that the letter was heartbreaking in its duality, love tempered by caution, hope shadowed by mistrust. This duality is what makes the story compelling. It is a narrative of human tension, of wanting to connect but fearing exposure, of expressing love while protecting oneself, of bridging gaps created by history, circumstance, and public scrutiny. The chapter concludes by acknowledging the unresolved tension. Meghan's fear shaped every word of the letter, but it could not eliminate the risk of disappointment, betrayal, or misinterpretation. Trust, once damaged, is difficult to restore, and the act of reaching out carries both potential and peril. The emotional stakes are high, the history is heavy, and the consequences are unpredictable. Meghan's courage in the face of fear sets the stage for the next chapter, where the focus shifts from fear to the delicate art of controlled vulnerability and measured disclosure. But what came next would challenge her in ways no letter could fully anticipate, and it would leave the world waiting in suspense. Imagine writing to someone you love, yet knowing that a single word could ignite conflict, betrayal, or public exposure. That was Meghan Markle's reality as she drafted her letter to her father, Thomas Markle. Walking on eggshells is more than a metaphor here. It is a lived experience. Each sentence had to navigate layers of past misunderstandings, media scrutiny, and the unpredictable dynamics of a fragile relationship. Every word mattered. Every phrase carried weight. Every pause was laden with potential consequence. In short, the act of communication had become an exercise in strategic emotional navigation. The insider revealed that Meghan approached the letter with painstaking care. She walked on eggshells with him, carefully weighing each sentence for emotional impact and potential risk. Imagine the mental calculus. How might he interpret this? Could this sentence be misread? Could the tone be taken as criticism? Could my vulnerability be weaponized? Every line was interrogated, revised, and reconsidered. The process was not just writing. It was psychological navigation, a precise balancing act between honesty and protection. This painstaking approach was necessary because the relationship had a complicated history. Thomas Markle had, over the years, made choices that eroded trust, creating a landscape where love coexisted uneasily with caution. Meghan's care and word choice reflected her awareness of this history. Each sentence in the letter had to respect the emotional minefield laid down by years of previous missteps. A misstep now could reopen wounds, trigger defensive responses, or, worse, become fodder for public scrutiny. Walking on eggshells was not optional. It was a survival strategy. The emotional intensity of this task cannot be overstated. Crafting sentences that are both sincere and strategically protective requires extraordinary self-awareness. Meghan had to navigate her own emotional responses, her father's potential reactions, and the broader public context, all simultaneously.